Hi, family. Welcome to this week's episode of The Gold Corner. For those that don't know me, my name is Joel Ojeda, and I'm the creator of the nonprofit organization and the YouTube channel called The Gold Corner. I created these in memory of my 2-year-old daughter, Mia, who battled childhood cancer, neuroblastoma to be exact, in 2017, and eventually was called back home 2 weeks before her third birthday in 2018. And this is a channel that I created just as a platform where we can come and bring the reality of what childhood cancer is. Welcome to the Gold Corner. Let's do this.
And now it's time for the main event. This is the moment you have all been waiting for. In memory of Mia Ojeda. Dedicated to all the brave little warriors that have fought and the ones that are currently fighting childhood cancer. For the thousands watching around the world, fighting out of the gold corner, it's time!
This evening, we have a, a very beautiful yet heartbreaking story. I had the opportunity to speak to our next guest, and we're going to be speaking to Nikki Ramirez from Kissimmee, Florida. And I followed her journey. And when it comes to childhood cancer, it always hits me, but it just hits me extra hard when it has to do with neuroblastoma, as that's the cancer that claimed the life of my daughter. But Nikki, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know it's been tough, and we've spoken outside of the recording, and we understand each other, unfortunately. But Nikki, thank you so much. We can't wait to hear Warrior Rosie's story. Welcome to the Gold Corner, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So Rosie was a normal 3-year-old or a normal little girl. She did not get sick often until she was actually diagnosed. We live in Kissimmee, which is right by Disney. So like we had the Disney lifestyle. We had annual passes. I took her all the time. And then around 3.5 years old, like she started getting really tired at Disney, and it wasn't normal for her. One day she almost collapsed, and it gets hot here. So I was like, maybe she was dehydrated, didn't think nothing of it. And then within a week later, she just stopped eating altogether and said she wasn't hungry. And then she had head and stomach pains. And I just thought it was because she wasn't eating that she had the stomach pains. So I waited 2 weeks to take her to her pediatrician, because she lost a lot of weight in the 2 weeks that she stopped eating. And the pediatrician said there's nothing wrong. Just keep trying to feed her different foods. She's okay. They sent me back home. A week later, she still wasn't eating, and she was getting even skinnier and complaining of stomach and head pains. So I took her back, and I was like, something's not right. I need you guys to figure something out. I never thought cancer. That was the last thing on my mind. And her pediatrician came in and out of the office multiple times. They tested her blood to see if she had any infections. And then he finally came in and he sat down and told me I needed to take her to the hospital immediately. And I was like, what? Why do I need to take my child to the hospital? Like, she's just not eating. And at first he didn't want to tell me why. He's like, just take her. The doctors there will tell you once they do the testing. And I was like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'll take her to the hospital, but you need to tell me right now what's going on. And I remember I had my 1-year-old son on my lap. He was sitting on my lap, and Rosie was playing right next to me in the pediatrician's office. And that's when he's like, I think she has cancer. And I just broke down. And I'm like, what? Like, I was so confused. Like, how could my child have cancer? She's been healthy her whole life. And he's like, he said from like her symptoms, which like not eating, headaches, and stomach pains, like to me, that would never correlate with cancer. Like, never thought it. He's like, I really think she has cancer. He thought she had leukemia, is what he told me. So they tested for leukemia. I took her straight to the hospital. They admitted us. My husband came to the hospital and got my son, and they tested her and they kept her overnight. I remember the resident coming in that night and being like, so far all the tests are coming back negative for leukemia. This is good news. It's probably just a bad infection. And I was like, yes. I went to bed a little relieved that night. The next night, when she was in the pediatrician's office, he felt her kidneys felt a little swollen. So they wanted to do an ultrasound of her kidneys, and that's when they discovered her tumors the next day. And they immediately like sedated her for an MRI. Like while we were in the ultrasound room, they did talking and had the machine ready for her as soon as we left, and everything just kind of caved in. They rushed her, ended up like telling me what they thought she had after the scan, which was neuroblastoma. And they rushed her to ICU because apparently her blood pressure was so high, she needed multiple drugs that can only be administered in ICU. And her normal pediatrician appointments, they never check blood pressure. So we had no clue that her blood pressure was so out of control. So she ended up being in ICU for about a month. And they also like, it just, everything caved in. They diagnosed her with chlorothimax, where she couldn't, her body couldn't process fat anymore. So they didn't allow me to feed her. They cut all her feeds. And for a 3.5-year-old, she wasn't eating anyways, but like, they wouldn't even let her have popsicles, like nothing. They cut all her feeds, and they immediately wanted to place the Broviac on her and give her TPN. My son wasn't a sickly child either. So like being in the hospital was very new to me. I trusted them, whatever they told me, I just went with at first. So they did that. And then they had to stage for her cancer to do the MIBG scan and everything that goes along with that. And they ended up sedating her for a week. And when they sedated her for a week is when I felt like something wasn't right. They sedated her because they felt it would be easier to do all the staging in that time with her sedated. And to me, it just was one thing after another at the first hospital we were at. It was the closest hospital to the house, and it was in her pediatrician's, I guess, network of hospitals. So we went there, but I quickly realized this was not the hospital for us. And I started doing research to try to figure out what were the top hospitals in our country for neuroblastoma. And I reached out to the oncologist at those hospitals, and I made the decision to have her medically flown to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. They refused to release her until they felt like she was safe to get out of ICU because of the blood pressure, but it was about a month, and then they released her. But in that month, they had made so many mistakes on her that they were willing. I was waiting for insurance to approve the flight, and insurance was lagging their feet about it. And so I called a sit-down meeting with the head of the nurse department, risk management, like basically everyone I could get that was the head of that hospital. I got in a room and I told them all the mistakes that had happened, the consequences that have happened to my child under their care, and I wanted her out of that hospital immediately. So they offered to fly us in one of their planes if my insurance didn't approve it within 24 hours. Luckily, my insurance approved it, so my insurance set up the flight. and she was flown, me and her flew to Philadelphia together on the plane. First time ever being in Philadelphia. I was born and raised in Florida, never really big cities. So it was a big change for me. But I felt very comfortable. The Children's Hospital Philadelphia is a huge hospital, but I felt very comfortable and reassured there with their doctors and their teams. She saw so many different doctors because she had the issues with the kidney, not digesting the fats and all that stuff. She had to get tubes placed in her body to actually drain fluid that was building up around her lungs because she couldn't digest fats. And one day she got so annoyed with the tube, she's like, she was looking at the surgeon who came in to inspect her tubing because one of the tubes kind of rubbed out, or didn't rub out, but was like, had rubbed some in her sleep because she tossed and turned a lot in her sleep. And she just was annoyed. So she grabbed the other tube out of her left side of her chest and she yanked it out of her body and like held up the tube for him. And I remember everyone was in shock. But they didn't put the tube back in her. They let her keep it out. So about a day or two later, she tried to pull out the other tube because she's like, if I can get one tube out, let me get the other one out. She was very feisty, Rosie. And then we got put on, I forgot what they called it, but we had a one-on-one. They had a hospital staff member sit in our room for like over a month, 24 hours a day to like sit right next to her to make sure she didn't pull any more tubes out of her body. But that first admission was a really long admission. We were in the hospital for over 2.5 months, just because all the issues like downpoured like all at once. And then we were finally released for a couple of days after her first cycle of chemo. Oh, no, after her second cycle. We were finally released for a couple of days and then she spiked her fever. So we had to be admitted again because she was neutropenic. So we got admitted again and we pretty much lived out of the hospital for her first 6 months of treatment. Just me and Rosie, and her dad and brother would come to visit us. My husband took almost a year off from work to be able to live in Philadelphia and have my son up there too with us. So we could all kind of see each other every day. And luckily his job allowed him to do that and just take a leave of absence. But it was a long journey. So there's COG hospitals and then the one non-COG hospital, basically, Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. I reached out to them when it came down to transplant time because I've heard such horror stories of stem cell transplants in kids. And I was so concerned because Rosie at that point had 5 cycles of chemo and the chemo really helped. It did take away a lot of her cancer. They did surgery, but when they did surgery, one of her kidneys was so damaged from the tumor, and the tumor was completely inside the kidney still and wrapped around it, that they removed the kidney, her left kidney. So she only had one kidney after surgery, and they wanted to go into stem cell transplant. And I was from the stories I read about only having one kidney and it not working well and side effects of stem cell treatments, I got really freaked out and I reached out to MSK for their advice. And they advised against stem cell treatments for her situation. And they advised me what they thought should happen. So I told her oncologist at CHOP, hey, I reached out to them. They don't think it's safe and I don't think it's safe either. Her oncologist was not happy. She basically told me if I don't want to do what she recommends, I need to leave the hospital with my child. So at that point, we had been in Philadelphia for a while. Like, I felt safe at that hospital, but I'm not the type of parent that's going to just do what the doctor says, especially when they give me that kind of ultimatum. You do what I say, or you and your child has to leave. And so I made a call into the head of oncology for CHOP, and I spoke to him. They sent him to the room, and I spoke to him about what had happened, and how I believe it should be ultimately a parent's choice, the type of treatment their child gets, especially if I'm not going against the grain 100%. I did my research. I spoke to another oncologist that's one of the top oncologists for neuroblastoma, Dr. Kushner. So, like, I, I'm not just blindly going against her oncologist. I'm doing research. And I told him I would like to stay at your hospital and follow what Dr. Kushner's treatment protocol is for the remaining of her treatment, if you guys will allow me to. And by the end of the conversation, he's agreed with me it should be a parent's choice and I should not be pressured into any treatment path I'm not comfortable with. And he allowed us to stay. And her oncologist, a day or two later, came and spoke to us and was like, we will do what Dr. Kushner said. So we did what he said. and I think January of 2020, Rosie stopped treatment. In November of 2019, they declared her no evidence of disease, even though she still had a couple of tumors in her body. But they took a PET scan and told me they were mature tumors. So that basically we only had to do a couple more cycles of chemo and then we were done. So we did that. And then we moved back to Florida in January of 2020. And had a normal life for a month before we went to New York City for Memorial Sloan Ketterling's vaccine trial. It's a trial to try to prevent relapse. So we did that trial. We enrolled in it. She enrolled like 2 weeks before COVID started. And so we did that. We flew back to New York maybe once a month during COVID, the height of COVID, when everything New York completely shut down. It was such a scary time to fly and be in the city, but we did it. She lasted 5 months on the trial before relapsing. And then when she relapsed, we decided to do her relapse at Memorial Sloan Kettering and do her treatment there. The doctors there were amazing. That hospital is amazing in general. Like, it's not just for kids, it's for adults too, but they make it so much fun and so nice for the kids. Like, they're getting their cancer and their treatments, but they did a lot of her treatments outpatient. So we could just be there during the day and then go back to the Ronald McDonald House or a hotel at night. And that was nice. So she didn't have to live out of a hospital. We were in the hospital a lot, but we didn't have to live out of it. She did treatment for a little over a year for relapse before her cancer started spreading again. And when it spread, when she relapsed, she had full energy, no signs of relapse. They caught it on routine scans. When it spread again, she had no signs. The cancer was back, no pain. She had great energy. Like, it was a complete shock to me that it had spread again. So the Dr. Kushner reassured me, we can handle this, we can do this. We still have more treatments available. So I did what he said. We did all the treatments he wanted us to do. And then in October of 2021, it looked like all her cancer was gone. They had one spike lighting up in her stomach, but they couldn't figure out what it was. They said there were no tumors there. They saw nothing. They did like CTs, MRIs. They did a lot, a PET scan, and they couldn't figure out what was lighting up in her stomach. So we just started doing 3F8, which was a form of immunotherapy, and hoped she would stay basically like that, stable or nothing, and they would put her back on the vaccine trial and try that for a second time. But when we went and I thought for sure she was going to be declared need again, no evidence of disease. But there was a lot of disease there when we went in October for the scans. And at that point, we had tried everything they had to offer. So their recommendation was a repeat, what she did at Frontline, a different type of immunotherapy with chemo. And I was uncomfortable doing that because her cancer came back after doing 10 cycles of that chemo and immunotherapy. So I didn't think that would do anything again. So I reached back out to the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to get their opinion, to see maybe if they could test her further and see if she had any mutations, that they had any sort of medications to target. Because Dr. Maris at SHOP and his wife have developed new medicines to target certain mutations in neuroblastoma. So I met with him. He tested her. She had no mutations, except for, he said, I forgot the name of it, but he said she grew chemo resistant, basically. She had the gene for chemo resistance. So he didn't really recommend doing chemo again. He had a new trial out. Rosie was the second kid on the trial. He told me about it. I figured she hasn't done it before. We have no other options at MSK. Let's do this. And her cancer spread so fast on that trial. We had to stop a month and a half into that trial. We had to stop. And they did an emergency MIBG therapy with a chemo drug to try to stop it because it was growing. Her cancer was now growing out of her skull. So they did that. That helped her cancer a little bit. We were hoping it would buy us time to get into the CAR T cell trial, because that's been some new trials coming up in neuroblastoma, but not many kids have been on them. So I'm like, let's try that. I'll try anything. I was doing research to figure out like I would have traveled anywhere for any type of promising treatments for her. But then her cancer, she had about a good month with energy after her IPG therapy, and then her cancer started spreading again. And then in March, it was right after her birthday, like a couple days after her birthday, March 3rd, they wanted to do scans again to see what was going on. And at that time, her whole body lit up by the MIBG scan. And her oncologist told me there's no hope. There's nothing we can do. You just have to take her home and try to have as much quality time with her as possible. So I was just up in Philadelphia with just her and me at the time. I had a breakdown at the hospital. I just had to, they broke the news away from Rosie. They had her playing with a child life specialist, and I just cried and cried and cried. And I didn't want to accept it. Like, I knew what he was telling me, but I didn't want to accept it. I thought something has to be out there. Something. So I immediately got his flights back to Florida, and we flew out back to Florida the very next day, and I started doing research that morning, trying to figure out other trials. But as I was doing my research at all the hospitals, there was nothing. She had done everything except for the CAR T cell trials, and she no longer qualified for those trials because how fast her cancer had spread. So we were pretty much just left to go home. They offered us like 2 chemos to try to take at home to slow the spread of her cancer, to give her like maybe a month or two. They didn't give me a timeline. They said up to 6 months was like, but it could be soon, faster. But they said the chemo could extend that a couple of months, possibly. So I tried to order the chemo. Insurance denied it, as they denied a lot of things in the past. So I had to fight with insurance for a couple of weeks before they would give it to me. But by the time they approved it, like, she was so ill, throwing up on it, that I spoke to her oncologist again, and we both agreed that it wasn't worth it. Like, if she's throwing up on this chemo and she's as bad as she is, it's better just to let her be and try to control her pain. So that's what we did. And I only had about a month and a week with her. From March 3rd. I never thought it would happen that fast. But it all caved in. And my daughter, like, she had so much treatment, her platelets were so low and her hemoglobin was so low, she was getting transfused like every other day. Like, the last week of her life, she like hated the hospital, didn't want to be near the hospital. I took her because I was so scared. I didn't want her to like bleed out or anything. So I took her for her transfusions. And then one day she just stopped waking up. Like, she just slept and slept and slept. Like, she was breathing fine, but she just kept sleeping. So I brought her into the hospital. I spoke to the palliative team and her oncologist. And I said, I think it's time for hospice. They took me into a room and told me that I should admit my child to the hospital because they thought she was going to die that day. For the life of me, I don't know how anyone could try to predict when someone will die. But they're like, she's going to die today, is what they told me. And I needed to admit her ASAP to the hospital. Rosie was over the hospital. I was too. I knew I never had the talk that you could possibly die from cancer because I did want to freak her out. But I knew, like, she wouldn't want to take her last breath at the hospital. So I told them I would not be admitting her today. I am taking my child home. I want hospice at my house ASAP, so that they can do whatever they do. They tried to pressure me into admitting her. So much so that they said they were going to take my car keys because it was not safe for me to drive home. I kind of get that because I was an emotional mess at that point. So I called my husband, who's a police officer, and I was like, I need some guys from your agency to come to the hospital and drive me and Rosie home right now. So his department sent 2 patrol cars to the hospital to get me and Rosie. And one of the officers drove my car so Rosie could be in her car seat and drove us home. It was about 8:00 that night when I realized that hospice had never called me. So I called the on-call doctor for the palliative team, and I asked her about hospice and why they haven't called. When were they going to come out to try to make sure she had her proper pain medicine and stuff like that? Because at that point, all her pain medicine was going through her G-tube, and her tumor was starting to push her G-tube out. So I was in so much fear that her G-tube would pop out of her stomach and that I would have no way to give her pain meds. And the palliative doctor told me very calmly, I didn't call hospice. And when I was like, why? She said, because I thought your daughter would be dead within 3 hours of leaving the hospital. I advised her she's not dead. I need hospice. And this doctor so calmly told me we could rediscuss this tomorrow. and see if she's alive then. I I cussed her out before I hung up the phone. Um, but I wasn't going to accept that. Like, I knew I had no trust in the palliative team at her home hospital at that point. That I had to try to take things into my own hands. I had met someone from hospice before. They introduced her to me like a month before Rosie got really ill. I found her business card. I called her. I emailed her. I explained what had happened in my phone call with the palliative team, and they sent a manager and a nurse to the house the next morning. And they, hospice on their own, started doing things. They couldn't give her any drugs without the palliative teams writing them. And of course, they didn't write any. So I also posted on social media, because social media can reach a lot of people. I posted exactly what was said in the conversation between me and the palliative doctor, and that I needed to get the name and contact info of the CEO of Arnold Palmer's Children's Hospital, because that was the hospital that she was being treated at in Orlando, Florida. So luckily, a lot of people saw that post. It was shared a lot. And my cell phone was given to the CEO, and he called me the next day too. It was not until I spoke to him that the palliative team actually wrote any prescriptions for Rosie for IV pain meds. So hospice was at my house doing paperwork and stuff, but they couldn't start giving her any meds or anything until the palliative team wrote her the prescriptions. So later that day, they finally wrote the prescriptions, and the palliative team was able to order the pump and the prescriptions to be delivered to the house. That was on a Tuesday. I took Rosie home on a Monday. So Tuesday, they write the prescriptions. We do not get the prescriptions until Wednesday at our house. So Rosie was breathing. She was basically in a sedated state because of all the pain meds I was giving her through her G tube. But she was still breathing. And then Wednesday hit, her breathing slowed down, and then it got better. And then it slowed down, and then it got better. And the hospice team warned me that she was probably near her last breath. We had her best friend come over, say goodbye to her. And I laid with her all day. I remember getting up for dinner because I hadn't ate that day yet. So I was like, let my husband take a turned leg with her and I'll go eat. About 5 minutes into eating, my husband yells, "Nikki, you need to come into the room right now." I ran into the room, and like within a couple seconds, she took her last breath. watching your child take their last breath was so hard. Like, I knew everything the doctors were telling me, and I knew that was probably what was going to happen, but I still had hope for some sort of miracle until she took her last breath. My son was only 4 at the time. We didn't tell him either that cancer could kill you. They both just thought cancer was something that some kids get, and they get really sick. And he had seen her very sick before, so he just thought she would bounce back from this session of being really sick. So after my husband and I could control ourselves and stop crying, we called him into the room. We had my husband's cousin at the house at the time playing with my son, distracting him. He brought him into the room, and we told Jean-Luc to kiss his sister one last time because she went to heaven. Having to tell a 4-year-old that, he did get it. He's like, "What do you mean, Mommy? What do you mean she's in heaven?" He was so confused. And he went over to her, gave her a big hug, and kissed her. And then I lost it again and started crying. So my husband's cousin took him out of the room. And we just laid with her for a while. Hospice called the funeral home. And the funeral home came and got her about 2 hours later. That was as soon as they could come to the house. So I had just been laying with her, stroking her hair, holding her hand, just being with her. And then when they got there, I remember, like, she was the first person I've ever seen pass away. I was holding her hand, and I went to let go of her hand because my husband was going to pick her up, and her hand wouldn't let go of mine. It had hardened around my hand. I was able to remove my hand, and my husband took her outside, and I followed behind him. It all, like, I could remember it so vividly, but it seems like such a blur at the same time when I'm talking about it. And then she was gone. They took her back to Arnold Palmer because I did sign an agreement to donate any of her tumors and any bones that were really infected with cancer cells to research for neuroblastoma. So they took her back to the hospital. They did an autopsy and removed all the tumors out of her body and multiple bones. I didn't want to read how many bones they took from her or anything like that, so I didn't read the report. But then she went to the funeral home, and I remember the viewing. My son would not leave her side. He sat by the casket for hours and reached in and held her hand. He would just hold her hand, and he did not want to leave that funeral home. He's like, no, we can't leave her. We can't leave her by herself. And then the next day of the funeral came, and that was even harder because he didn't understand burying her, and he freaked out about it at first. And he just kind of shut down too. We all kind of shut down. And we were lucky to have really close friends and family who would watch our son for us so that me and my husband can just shut down how we needed to from the world. And they took care of him in our house. Well, we were in our house, but in our room. Trying to be closed off. And life just went on, but it didn't for us. Like, it went on for everyone. but like our world just stopped. And for a long time, I just couldn't deal with the general public. Like, I couldn't go out, I couldn't function. I've never had anxiety before this journey, but like I had social anxiety. I don't know, I just couldn't be around people. It completely changed me. And it changed my husband and son too. My son, like, he still smiles and plays, but he does not smile like he used to. Him and his sister Rosie used to have dance parties all the time. He will not dance anymore. He told me no dancing in the house. He doesn't want dancing in the house anymore. We put him in therapy because he didn't, I mean, he's only 4. He didn't really talk too much to us about anything. He was just sad and just sad for a while. And then one day something changed and he got happy, but not like happy, just like not sad and crying all the time anymore. And then like a month later, he started having tantrums, and not just like normal tantrums. Like, he would snap and get really angry really fast. So that's when we actually put him in therapy, in play therapy, to try to help that out. And that helped some. But he only lasted 2 months, and then he told me, "Mommy, I don't want to go back to that lady." So I was like, I tried to get him to go back to therapy. He's like, "No, I'm done talking to that lady. I don't want to talk to her anymore." So we stopped therapy for him, and he's been doing better, but you definitely see how all of our personalities have changed since Rosie's been in heaven. It's been really hard for us, because we all grieve differently. But just processing, when you think back to everything that happened, like all the struggles I had with different hospitals, doctors, the way they behaved, and having to go up against the doctor. I always thought doctors were super smart. You should never question them. They know what's best. And I learned very quickly that is not true. They are book smart. They are good at taking exams and reading books. But yeah, I learned a lot on this journey, about life, medical system, and how to really like just stand up and fight for your child, because if you don't, no one will. So
It's just, I mean, listening to your story, the similarities of everything, right? I mean, from the misdiagnosing in the beginning, we were told leukemia as well. and it turned out being stage 4 high-risk neuroblastoma, and we had to leave our hometown as well to be treated elsewhere. And you know, when you talk about these hospitals, it's you know, hospitals that I knew as well, you know, the Sloan and CHOP, and we were also going to do a trial in Helen DeVos in Michigan.
okay.
Yeah, and just Mia never made it to that. But yeah, it's like you say, you know, I mean, unfortunately, you know, we trust the doctors, right? And you know, we because they're the doctors, right? They went to school for 12 plus years to be able to do what they do. But we need to advocate, you know, be advocates for our children, and yeah, I mean, we have to be their voice, because it's all of this misdiagnosing and giving the wrong treatments and stuff. I mean, that's got to stop. And that all goes to, you know, what we're all very familiar with is the 4% funding that we get. And that's why, you know, doctors and hospitals, you know, turn out saying that they can't do anything else. But but it's our children. We would do anything, like you said, we'd go anywhere for them to get treated, and try to do anything. And Nikki, and I followed your journey. I know you followed my journey, and we were on social media, and I followed Rosie's journey as well. Um and it's just it's difficult, and we've talked about this on other occasions, and how difficult this part of life is now. you know um and thank you. And if I'm not mistaken, I think this is the first time that you actually openly share the story in detail. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to say thank you so much for choosing our avenue to do so. And I know that you also created a nonprofit organization in memory of Rosie. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit more about that, what you all do, and how they can get a hold of you, for any donations or anything that they might have questions on?
Yeah, so part of my grieving process was a spiritual journey that turned into what am I placed on this earth to do? And I determined my purpose was to try to help other kids battling cancer. So I started a nonprofit called Rosie's Adventures. And I called it that because Rosie, she loved going on adventures, even throughout all her treatment. She would be released from the hospital in New York City, and she'd be ready to go shopping in New York and like be out and about on the town. So I started a nonprofit called Rosie's Adventures. Um, and it's basically for kids in Central Florida. We pretty much try to assist with anything we can. Our goal is to be an experience-based foundation where we try to create really fun adventures for kids battling cancer so they can create as many memories as possible with their families. So we do adventures with first responders. And we also do like photo shoots, care packages when the kids are admitted in the hospital, and stuff like that. We wanted to make it as fun as possible for the kids when they're not in treatment and when they're filling up to leaving their houses. So you could reach us. Our website's www.rosiesadventures, Rosie spelled ROSIES.org. And if any you guys can look at the website, there's donation buttons and everything, and it explains what the foundation's about. If anyone has questions, they can also reach me at info@rosiesadventures.org. Our goal is basically to bring as much fun as we possibly can to the kids while they're admitted in the hospital and then when they're out, so that the families can really have bonding time together and have good memories together.
And that's very important. And for all our viewers, that you've been following this for a while, you hear me say this over and over, but something like nonprofit organizations, and I'm sure Nikki was there at the hospital when all these organizations would go and help us when we were, just something as simple as an adventure, as a photo shoot or something. It would bring a smile to these children, and for them to forget for just a little bit that they're fighting for their lives. Just to see them smile, even for just a little bit, even though they're connected to medication or whatever it is. Trust me, it really does make a difference to them and to us as parents as well, because for a while, we don't see our children smile. So when we get to see them smile because of something like that, it brings joy to us as well. So we'll be leaving the link here to that nonprofit, to Nikki's nonprofit, to Rosie's Adventure. If God has put it in your heart and you want to bless them, you don't have to be from the Florida area. You can get into the website and donate there, and be able to help them out. And you're able to see the pictures and everything. And if you follow them, on their social media, you'll be able to see. And you might not even see the lives that you're touching by donating $1, $5, $100, whatever it is. But trust me, it goes to good use. All these nonprofit organizations, there's a lot of bigger ones, but the ones that are started by parents that have gone through it with their child, we know the passion and we know exactly where we're putting the dollars, and those are just to create memories, like Nikki was saying, because for us as for us parents that have already a child that's home or in heaven, we know that the most precious things that we can have right now are those memories, those memories that we created with them, and those times that they would smile when they would get, a package or a photo shoot or anything. That's priceless, and that's something that we're going to take for the rest of our lives. So Nikki, once again, I just wanted to say thank you so much. And if you follow my episodes, I do always ask our parents two questions, and it's interesting to hear everybody's response, because again, like the grieving process, it's going to be different for everybody, and it's okay. You don't have to grieve like anyone else. You don't even have to grieve like your spouse. It's your own journey and what you're going through. So Nikki, I know it's been a little over a year now, or it hasn't even been a year.
Hasn't been a year. She passed away on April
Okay.
13th of 2022. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so you're still a baby when it comes to this, and I can tell you, it's we've talked about this. It's difficult, and it's going to be difficult. But Nikki, where you're at right now, and what's kind of interesting now is I've talked to parents that were on the episodes, on previous episodes 2 years ago when I started this, and I'll talk to them now, and they'll look back at the advice that they gave at that point and where they're at now, and it's beautiful to see how the memory of our child, of our children, yes, it's gonna hurt, but how far it's brought us, and how good God has been with us, even though our children are not here, but we can still say God is good. And even me, back then when I would share my story, I would say, I'm not strong at all, I'm so weak. But now, I've realized that that's a lie, that we are strong. To have gone through something like we went through, it takes someone strong to still be standing here and to even be able to speak about it. Again, I told you, it took me even over a year to even speak about my daughter's story. But those two questions that I'm going to ask you, Nikki, number one is, what advice would you give to other parents that are in the same situation as you and I are? And the second part of that question is, what advice would you give parents that have perfectly healthy children?
Okay. For parents that are in our situation, who's lost a child, I would say try to find your purpose in life. Like, I've had thoughts about, I'd probably be better with Rosie in heaven. I want to be with her, but I have a son on earth still. And so try to figure out what your purpose in life is and work towards that. And be present for your children on earth, because kids keep it to themselves. I feel like, I don't know, from the other families I know, their kids like hold it all in. So just try to be present and be there for your kid, even when you're struggling, and really try to find meaning in your life and live your life to the fullest to fulfill that meaning. And for parents that have healthy kids, you guys are so lucky. So lucky. Don't take it for granted. Spend time with your kids. Go out all the time. You never know when your life might change. Don't take it for granted. Like, spend your time with your kids. Don't be on your phones. Don't think work or other things are more important. Like, your kids are there. They're healthy. Go take them out. Watch your kids and advocate for them. Definitely. And I would advise even healthy parents, figure out what your purpose in life is. A lot of people, they go to work, they come home, they hang out with their family and close friends. And that's what they do. They don't think, why am I here on this earth? What good can I do? There's so much good we can all do, especially if we step out of like our little inner circle of people. There's so many lives that you can touch. So many people who never met a child with cancer came into our lives on this journey, and they created so many amazing memories for us and touched our lives and brought so much joy to Rosie. They were an inspiration to Rosie, but she was an inspiration to them too. So like I would just encourage everyone to like look at yourselves, figure out what you think your true purpose in life is, and do it.
Very good advice, Nikki. Thank you. And for those parents again, and I know we have a lot of viewers that don't have children with cancer, and you might say, well, I'm not a cancer parent, but Nikki and I were not cancer parents until we were. So like she said, don't they take things for granted, you know. Nikki, before we finish the episode, anything else that you want to leave us with?
Oh gosh. No, I don't think. Just kiss your kids goodnight. Give them big hugs. Tell them you love them all the time. Because it really, you just never know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly. So don't take things for granted and just love your family. Well, Nikki, I just once again just wanted to say thank you so much for being able to share Warrior Rosie's story. I know it hit home with me so much, a lot of the similarities. And for all our viewers, you know, this is a reality that we live now every single day. You know, I'm going to leave here the description and the link on the description of the video to Rosie's Adventures. And if you want to reach out to Nikki as well, you know, I'll leave that information there. Once again, if God has blessed you and you want to be a blessing, please consider donating to their foundation, as it will go to good use. So thank you once again for tuning in this week. Remember to pray for your family, pray for your children. Let's pray for our nation, because now we're really needing it more than ever. This is who we are. We are the Gold Corner. We're a broken family, but we're broken together. Remember to live each day to its fullest, because tomorrow's not promised. And just hold on a little while longer, because we're almost home. God bless you, and we'll see you next time.